Well, hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFurio. I'm your host for the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me today, and I would be really grateful for you subscribing to the show, and you could do that on YouTube as well if you're watching this on YouTube. I'm actually counting these things out on my hand if you can see me on YouTube. And then share these episodes. And I would really appreciate that last one, especially because that's how we get the word out about Keys to the Shop most effectively. And there's a lot of great content that comes out every month. Today's example is no exception. We're talking about mentorship. And, mentorship is actually one of those things that we covered on the show in the first year of the show in 2017 with our good friend Pete Licata. So we'll link to that in our recommended episodes, which, by the way, every episode that we do, we have recommended episodes. So they're related to this topic, and it allows you to study the topic further. There's almost 900 episodes of Keys to the Shop that have been published in these last 7 years. So lots to choose from there. So I want to get to this one thing that every show I talk about this because it's really important. Part of the reason why Keys to the Shop is around is to provide some best practices, some curated content to help you grow in a stepwise fashion. And part of how that happens is not just by consuming information, but it also happens in community. And that's why we have started at Keys to the Shop, the key holder coaching groups. And we are getting ready to start our third cohort in September. What key holder coaching groups are is a mastermind group of coffee shop owners who are there to help each other give insights and find clarity, provide accountability and encouragement over the course of a 6-month cohort in the key holder coaching groups. This community of support is really transformative. And in the coming weeks, you're going to see testimonials. We've got a few of those that have been posted before, but it's such a wonderful experience each time we conduct these. As I host these mastermind sessions with our key holder coaching group members, a lot of cool stuff gets discussed and a lot of great change gets implemented. So email chris@keystotheshop.com if you want to be considered for early access to our application for the September cohort. Again, that's chris@keystotheshop.com. Now, I want to recognize our sponsor today, Ground Control. Ground Control is a company that has revolutionized the way that we understand batch brew coffee. The technology not only allows us to make better batch brew coffee, but it makes batched espresso concentrate for use in batched iced lattes, also cold brew concentrate for batched cold brew. So go to groundcontrol.coffee, check out their new machine that is 30% higher in its output of batched concentrates, but also is smaller than the original Cyclops. And if you're looking for quality and an upgrade in efficiency of production in your cafe, then definitely check out the Ground Control Brewer at groundcontrol.com. Today, we're also supported by the Barista series from Pacific. They are the foundational, original plant-based performance beverage. Their plant-based beverages are created for baristas and tested by baristas before they are released to the industry. And that's why they perform so well on the bar. Stand up to the heat from steaming, a great texture for latte art, and as well as those two things, it has a balance of flavor that keeps the focus on the coffee itself. So all of this kind of harmonizes and creates a great customer experience. And I think you should experience it for yourself. So to do that, just go to pacificfoodservice.com and get samples sent to you. You can steam it up, taste it, see what you think. I really think you're going to be impressed by it, truly. And just if you're looking for the best plant-based beverages to serve your customers, you really ought to think about the Barista series from Pacific. Okay, everyone. Well, today we're going to dive into the topic of mentorship. And, in the coffee industry, of course, we have room to grow. We have need to create more access to mentorship and to pass on wisdom in both organic relationships as well as formal relationships that we create through programs. And that is what we are going to be talking about with our very special guest, Dr. Ruth Gotian, who is the Chief Learning Officer, Associate Professor of Education in Anesthesiology, and a former Assistant Dean for Mentorship and Mentoring at Weill Cornell Medicine, and is a globally recognized expert in mentorship and leadership development. And she's been hailed by Nature and Wall Street Journal and Columbia University as an expert in mentorship and leadership development. And she was named as a top 20 mentor worldwide. And Thinkers 50 ranked her as the number one emerging management thinker in the world in 2021. And LinkedIn recognized her as a top voice in mentorship in 2023. As a semi-finalist for Forbes 50 over 50, Dr. Gotian is a prolific contributor to Harvard's Business Dr. Gotian is a prolific contributor to Harvard Business Review, Forbes, and Psychology Today, where she shares insights on optimizing success with a focus on mindset and skill set as a peak performer. That includes Nobel Prize winners, astronauts, Olympic and NBA champions. She's also an award-winning author of The Success Factor and the latest book, The Financial Times Guide to Mentoring. And that book on mentoring, The Financial Times Guide to Mentoring, seeks to bridge a gap in the world of professional development by providing readers with practical tools and strategies to understand and establish and sustain effective mentoring relationships. It is a book that demystifies mentorship because it does feel like a big word. We talked about this a little bit ago on the show. It's like number 2 I mentioned earlier in the episode intro with Pete Licata, world barista champion. And Ruth Gotian has a world of expertise and experience that brings unparalleled depth and just clarity to the issue of mentorship. It's really incredibly important that the next generation of professionals in coffee, the shop, and across the industry are given the opportunity to learn from people who possess wisdom, in that institutional wisdom from just hard-earned lessons and expertise. And so if we want that to be a part of our legacy as we all kind of get older in the industry, or if you want to become wiser and you want to pursue mentorship with somebody who you respect and gather for yourself a group of mentors, this episode is going to kind of break down for you what mentorship is, how to pursue it effectively, how to give it effectively, and what it means to do mentorship well and what it can do to transform the industry that we are in, or any industry for that fact. So I'm grateful, so grateful for Ruth Gotian for being on the show. And I'm excited for you to hear what we talked about in this interview. So let's get right to it. Here now is my conversation on demystifying mentorship with author of the Financial Times Guide to Mentoring, Ruth Gotian. Well, Ruth, what a pleasure to have you on the show. Welcome to Keys to the Shop. How are you?
I am doing well, and greetings from New York City.
Yes, yes. I love the subject of mentorship. I love that you've written a book on mentorship and that this is kind of born from your own experiences in your academic career and your profession. And the other thing that really has inspired this conversation is that it feels like a far-flung thing, like mentorship is for other people, but this is one of those things that is tied to accessibility from your perspective, and I love that about your approach. Talk to us a little bit about how you've arrived at the focus on mentorship as a result of your own experiences in studies.
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to unscare everyone. You said through my academic studies, 100%, but I translate academic theory into things that people can use every day, which is why I translate the academic stuff into not just lay language, but also into lay press. I am a social scientist, which means I talk to people all day long. And my expertise is around success and high achievers. What does it take to be successful? And in order to do that, I get to hang out and speak to some of the most incredible people in the world, Nobel Prize winners and astronauts and Olympic champions and NBA champions and CEOs to figure out what has, how their head is working. And then I reverse engineer it and lay out a blueprint for everyone else and then go around the world teaching them how to become successful. Now, one of the things that they all had in common was that all of these high achievers, they're continuously learning. And one of the ways that they are continuously learning is by surrounding themselves with a team of mentors, people who believe in them more than they believe in themselves. And I know that sounds ridiculous. Why does a Nobel Prize winner not believe in themselves, or an Olympic champion? Trust me, they have imposter syndrome just like the rest of us. So if mentors are good enough for the Nobel Prize winners and astronauts and NBA champions, why do the rest of us think we don't need them? And have been studying it and writing about it, and recently came out with the book Financial Times Guide to Mentoring.
Yes, and thank you for breaking that down, because the ability to get a foothold into a subject like that is so incredibly important, because then we can explore it for our own selves. Talk to us a little bit about this. Just kind of get us familiar with high achievers' mindsets and why mentorship is so important. Because in today's atmosphere of YouTube and podcasts, and we like to make fun of it, in a kind of meta kind of way on a podcast, we consume all of this and we get starstruck. It's for them, and they are high achievers. You mentioned you may not think a Nobel Prize winner would need that, or this high achiever, but is it more like they got there because of that?
Absolutely. All of these people are willing to say, I don't know what I don't know. And I
Mm.
am going to turn to the person who knows more about this topic than I do. They don't need to be the world's expert, but they need to be the expert that they have access to. And that might be somebody who's senior to them, but it might be somebody who's junior to them, and it might be someone at their level. Having the power to say, I don't know what I don't know, that means that you show vulnerability. And the high achievers see vulnerability as a strength, not a weakness. That's huge. That's huge, because the second you walk around saying, I know everything, I don't need help, that's when you're in trouble.
And you might not say it. You
Yes,
might just never admit it. But
absolutely.
you want people to assume that you know it all.
That's right. Well said.
Mm. Vulnerability, then, as sort of this superpower, is that one of the common traits of successful people?
It's part of it. It didn't come through as the four main elements of success that I studied, and that was the last book called The Success Factor. But
Yeah.
it's really about how they overcome challenges. That's one of the four elements of success. Vulnerability is a piece of that, but there's a lot of strings to pull on with that. But it's definitely part of it.
So the mentor that you have in your orbit at the moment doesn't have to be the perfect one. And sometimes I think that stalls us from actually asking for help. We want to ask for the right help. And if we don't know what we don't know, then it's also obvious to us that we don't know how to get help from the right people. So, how do we take the first step in understanding mentorship in a way that makes it so that we can accept help from imperfect but available mentors in our lives?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'll correct you. I don't have a mentor, I have seven mentors. And those are seven mentors I regularly reach out to, because when I say I have a team of mentors and you should have one, I practice what I preach. So I
Mm-hmm.
surround myself with people who know things about things I don't know about. And the reason it's so important is you can always add people to your mentoring team. Now, who's available? That's half the battle, right? So seeing who is there. And there is no such thing as a perfect mentor, because you will never find somebody who could match your cultural upbringing, religious upbringing, gender, stage in your career, whatever. There's no one person who matches it perfectly,
Right.
but you can create that idea of perfection by having different people in different areas that together make up that idea of perfection. So I
Mhm.
have a physician, a scientist, a lawyer, military, education, and business. I am missing someone in the arts. That's what I'm looking for. And the reason I want all that is because when I am faced with a challenge, I don't just want to look at someone within my own industry because then I would just be in an echo chamber. I want to know how things were done in other industries because someone might have solved a problem that I already have. Now, let me give you an example. Anyone who's listening who has ever had surgery or knows of anyone who has had surgery would know that in the operating room, there is a checklist. And before any operation starts, they go through that checklist. We want to make sure that we are operating on the right person, the right part of the body. Everyone is aligned. We know what we're doing, right? That is to avoid medical errors. Where did that idea of checklists come from? The aviation industry.
Mm.
Pilots use checklists, and that's how they avoid errors. So a problem within the medical industry was solved with a solution from the aviation industry. And that's why we want to look outside our own industry for solutions to either problems we know we have or problems we don't yet know we have. But we're collecting all this information as we hear about other people's experiences, storing it in our brain. And then when that problem comes up, we can pull out that solution from the storage in our brain because we've seen this before. This is not new. And we know how it was resolved in another industry. Let's try it out.
Yeah, that reminds me. I think that was something that I was impressed by Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, and connecting uh, just examples of different companies using disparate ideas to increase their ability to be resilient. And the idea that you've got this deep bench of outside of your field mentors, that sounds pretty cool. And I think before we get too far down here, maybe I would like it if you would define for us a mentor. I mean, because part of this feels like it needs to be, like you said, it doesn't have to be, but we assume it has to be in our field. They're going to help me be a successful coffee shop owner. I need a coffee shop owner to do
Yeah.
that. Um, but what is a mentor to you?
A mentor is someone who believes in you more than you believe in yourself. They have experiences and a network that you can draw upon. And they are able to see things beyond the horizon that you see for yourself because they know what's out there and they know the path to get there. So they can save you a lot of time and a lot of heartache.
And you would have to be a student a little bit of this person before saying to them, which we'll get to, I suppose, in how to, you know, assemble this team of career Avengers, I guess.
Yes.
Uh, you know, you would have to already know that they have this experience to say, hey, this is somebody who I would like to tap into their wisdom. So, how do you
Yeah.
take the first step in sort of researching who your first example would be as a mentor?
Look, remember I said you don't know what you don't know, and you don't even know what problems you're having. If you're going to an event with the notion of, I need to talk to Chris because Chris is the expert at so and so, I need to talk to him, I need to get everything on his mind, I need to ask him to mentor me. That sounds gross. That sounds transactional. Chris, I would recommend you run the other way. Nothing about that sounds good. But if we were to start chatting and we started to connect, and you see that we are aligned in our values, aligned in our work ethic, aligned in our thinking, anything like that, now we want to spend time together. Now I want to learn from you and you want to learn from me. It no longer feels transactional. It no longer feels icky. And there was never a request for mentorship. So I might approach you and say, Chris, I am thinking of opening my own coffee shop. I know exactly what kind of coffee I want to sell. I've already done market research to see where the other coffee shops are. There's probably some things I haven't thought of, especially about how to hire staff. I know you have experience in this. Could I take 20, 30 minutes of your time? I want to show you the research I've done. You tell me what I'm missing and any advice you might have. That's
Hmm.
very different than how do I open up a coffee shop?
Yeah,
Where do you
well, that's
start,
very
right?
specific.
Specific, it's contextual. I told you why I want to talk to you. You have experience in this. That's
Hmm.
very different. It doesn't feel transactional. It feels like I've done my part. I've gone as far as I can go alone, but I know that there's more. I just don't know what that is. And that's where
Yeah.
you come in. People want to help people who help themselves. Show that you've done the work, and then you will see people will flock to you.
Yeah, that's a good point. And the fear is that it does feel icky to say, I want you to be my mentor. It's like you're asking somebody out. It's
Yeah.
weird. Uh
It's like
and
asking them
it
for a
feels,
job.
yeah, that's yeah, another thing. Like when people have a little bit of trepidation is, and I imagine this is true of people who are high achievers who maybe get propositioned for mentorship often.
Yes.
They're a little cagey around the idea of, lots of people having that approach to them. So it sounds like there's a bit of a spirit of mutuality here, that it needs to be a part of it, and a long play. So a little patience in developing the relationship rather than making it like, well, this one conversation we have in the beginning needs to be like the end all be all. I need to get the ROI on
Yeah.
this conversation, right?
Oh, no. And you brought it up perfectly. You wouldn't ask someone to marry you on the first date. So, why in the world would you ask someone to be your mentor? You don't even know them. You want to spend
Hmm.
the time getting to know each other. That's the most critical part. Are you aligned? Do you have time? Is this really the best person who could be helping me? Or could they help me in a specific area? Or are they too busy? Or are they narcissistic? All these things you need to know
Yeah.
before you start getting in. And I highly recommend not asking someone to be your mentor, because that sounds like an obligation. And I don't know about you, but I do not have all this free time just, waiting to mentor people. So when you do want to help people, you want to make sure that these are people who want to put the effort in. And don't worry about giving them a label. That comes much later. And when you don't ask and you just start the conversation, then
Hmm.
you will see that they reach out to you to help you more. And actually, for those who are listening, I literally just wrote an article about this for Forbes, which says how to engage in that conversation with the mentor so that you are the person that everybody wants to mentor. How do you show that? So if anybody who's listening, just go to Forbes and then my name, Ruth Gotian, you'll see the articles. And that's the one that was at the end of June.
I think the idea of something being very helpful to us and very a powerful motivator, or adds to the momentum of our career, feels like something that we have to really see the value of right away. Um, and so, assembling for yourself mentors over the long haul, there's a bit of patience involved in that. And I would assume then also being a mentor to somebody else, it doesn't feel like, every week we meet for 1 hour and we talk about high substance things. Yet over the long term, there can be some pretty ground shifting changes that happen in your career as a direct result of having this relationship. How do we wrap our heads around this long term impact of mentorship versus the short term demand we have for content and
Yeah.
return on investment these days?
So, first of all, being a mentor is not a life sentence. I could be your mentor today, and I might be your mentor for 5 years or 10 years. But our needs when we're 40 are different than our needs when we're 30.
Yeah.
Our needs when we're just opening up a shop are very different from when we've been running it for 20 years. So the person who helped us get to a certain point might not be the best person to help us get to that next juncture. And
Yeah.
they can move. You don't have to fire them, but they can move from mentor to friend, mentor to colleague, right? When I was getting my doctorate, I talked to my mentor every single day on my commute to work. Now we talk about once a quarter, right? It's different.
Yeah.
So that's the one thing to consider. The other thing about let's meet every other Tuesday at 4 o'clock. I don't think that works anymore, because what if I have a question on a Thursday?
Oh,
Do I
yeah.
need to wait until the following Tuesday, or can I just shoot you a quick text or an email or a voice message? Sometimes we don't need an hour. We just need a 5-minute conversation. So having that flexibility is very helpful. And I think it has shifted the way we think about mentorship.
We've talked a lot about the mentorship of, from the perspective of getting it and finding people to help us. They don't have to be in our industry. They're respectable people, and we come to them with well-defined problems and a sense of building relationship over time that helps enrich our own career and also them, I imagine, as well as the mentor. Being a mentor yourself feels like it might be different in that, I mean, do you seek out people to mentor, to pass your wisdom on to the next generation, or do you wait for people to come to you? Do they need to have that buy-in moment first, or are they just waiting for somebody to approach them and help them?
I'll tell you what the best mentors do. They seek out this diamond in the rough, the people
Mm,
who want to do something, don't really know how to do it, but there's something there. And you want to turn that diamond in the rough into something that's really bedazzles and sparkles, because that is the power of mentorship when you can do that. But you want someone with that raw talent and that drive. And when you can find that, then you want to just elevate that. And I'll give you an example. I had a student years ago. I was giving a workshop at a conference. And after the conference, you know how when you go to these conferences that have workshops that have 10,000 post-it notes in different colors all over the walls, right? And then you're like, whatever happened with all those things we discussed in the workshop and all those post-it notes? Well, we started a Slack channel. This is back in the day. And we said, okay, how are we implementing? This is for everyone who's at the workshop. How are we implementing everything that we talked about? And one of the attendees was a young student, young medical student. And she said, oh, I found all this information, all these statistics on all these websites and so on and so forth. And I said to her, I said, you need to write an article. You pull all of this data together and you write an article because you are looking at a trend that no one else has seen. She said, well, I've
yeah.
never published before. And I raised my hand. I said, I have, right? I'm an academic. I said, let me show you how it's done. So we work together side by side. And my role with me is any mentee who writes the first draft becomes the first author. Big deal for academics. And she became, on her first ever publication, the first author in a major journal. That launched her career because she has published over and over again. She learned the tools and she did it. It was her something that she put in Slack that I was able to see, whoa, this person knew to look for this data, pull it all together, but didn't know what to do with it. That's where a mentor comes in. So I was able to pull on that string, see that she had the glimmer of something. Now I went up to her and I was like, you've got the glimmer. What do you want to do with it? And she was all systems go.
You saw this in the course of a normal day's work
Yeah.
that didn't seem like you were out hunting for a mentee, like let me see what diamonds in the rough I can mine today. uh, Maybe it's because you've got this mentality already, but it almost feels as though inspiration comes to us and we have to have a yes to that, like I will follow through with that initial thought, that maybe I should help this person. I guess you could have talked yourself out of it. Said, well, I'm busy. I'm not going to do that. What was the thing that made you say yes? Was it just your experience in saying, I know that's going to be helpful for them and that's just who I am? And how do we go from that's a good idea to now we're actually offering and we're actually doing it?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. 61% of mentoring relationships happen organically. They're not matched, which means we need to put ourselves in these situations where we are surrounded by people who think 3 steps ahead of us. And they think differently than us because we can always learn from them. This was a conversation that happened over Slack, not even in person.
Yeah.
Right? So if that's something that could happen, there are people like to help people that they see something in them, right? One of the Nobel Prize winners who I got to interview was Dr. Bob Lefkowitz. He won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 2012. Now, the Nobel Prize is usually shared by 2 to 3 people. So he rightfully asked when he got that 4 a.m. phone call, and he said, can you let me know who my co-recipient is? And they told him. It turned out it was his mentee. And I said, Dr.
Yeah.
Lefkowitz, I said, was it strange to have your mentee be the co-recipient for the biggest prize in the world in your field? He said, strange. He said, that is the badge of honor. That is how a mentor measures their success, by their mentee's success.
Yeah.
So it's not that any of us are looking for anyone to mentor. I never have said, I have a free hour today. Let me see who I could mentor. Nobody does that. It's those water cooler conversations. It's the conversations when you're online. It's the conversations on Slack. It's the conversations in the chat of a Zoom where people start to connect and they'll say, I like the way Chris thinks about that. That's different. I haven't thought about that. And then you start to reach out to people to learn more about them. And that is the organic way, the 61% of the mentoring relationships, that's how they occur. It starts by getting to know people. And if you show that you have promise and willing to work hard, the mentors will come flocking.
That's a great point. And looking for that thing, that special it factor in that mentee, I imagine it's important to understand your own personal bias and look for something that's a little bit outside of just, I like the way they think, because it's like looking in a mirror and I'm just going to multiply a lot of little mini me's in, in my career.
Yeah.
How do we get over that to really see something in somebody that's not just a reflection of our own self for ego's sake?
For the mentor to find a mentee who's
Yeah.
different. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Any mentor who's looking to create a mentee as their mini me, run away. Just run away. That is their ego talking, that they are not there to help. And things are different. Your life is not like their life. Your career is not their career. So to say that you want it to be a replica, that just doesn't make any sense. Why wouldn't you want it to be even better? Right?
Sure.
If they are only mentoring so that they can create you in their image, only one
Yeah.
thing can do that, and it's not you or me.
I imagine if the mentee, out of just the idea that they might have stars in their eyes if they say, oh, you've achieved these things, I want to be just like you. It feels like the responsible thing to short circuit that and be like, no, you don't.
Well,
that's
what
that's
part do you want? What part do you
Yeah.
want? That fame of the Nobel? Well, there's other ways to get fame. You know,
Mm,
what is it exactly that you want? What is it that we're going for? You can't start having a conversation with a mentor until you know what it is you need help with, what you're seeking, what you want to grow. Otherwise, where's this conversation going?
yeah.
How are you going to measure if it works? Otherwise, it's just another friend. Nothing wrong with friends, but that's not mentorship.
And there's an element of coaching in this too. And the thing
Yes.
that coaches do, and I do this with my clients, is people say, I need X. And then I could easily say, well, here's a formula, voila, you've got X. Now, the question that you just asked was, well, what is your goal? And it could be way different than the stated intention.
Yeah.
And in that conversation, it feels like you've just helped them unlock something they would never have been able to unlock themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's definitely some coaching within mentoring and mentoring within coaching. I don't think you can have one without the other, but they're different, right? Mentoring is long term. And usually the person who is mentoring you has some expertise in something that you want to get better at. And usually, at least in the United States, mentors are not paid. It's different in Europe. Coaching is different because coaching is more nuanced. It's to help with something specific, it's time bound, and coaches do get paid all over the world. So there's
Yeah.
definitely a difference.
So if I'm looking to do this as a person that needs a mentor, what can I do to prepare myself to ask good questions? Since I'm in this phase of my career where it feels like just chaos and I need clarity, I know that, but I don't want to go like approach somebody with the idea that they're going to fix everything for me. I have to put some work in myself. So how do I prepare myself to receive mentoring?
Oh, that's a great question. I think first you need to recognize what it is that you want help with. Then you say, okay, here are the things that I need to do. Approach someone who's going to give you guidance and advice. And then you go away and you think about it. They gave you 5 things to think about, and you want to circle back. This is the key thing that most people don't do, and say, Chris, thank you so much for your guidance on this. I actually did number 1, 4, and 5. I thought it was perfect. And here's what happened: 1 and 4 worked, 5 didn't work. I'm going to make an adjustment. You discuss it. I did not do 2 and 3. While I value everything you said about that, I did not think it aligned with whatever. You give a reason. You don't just say, don't just ignore it. And when you have this loop of a conversation with a mentor, it shows that you are open to it, that you're acting on it. And when you don't act on it, there's a reason. And the more contextual you can be about what it is that you need help with, the better it's going to be. And after you do that once or twice, you will see that the mentor will start to say, well, Chris, have you thought about X? You never thought about it because you don't know what you don't know. So they
Yeah.
just planted a seed in your head. And that happens after a few times. But first, approach it with some context.
I love that. It feels like you're honoring the time that the mentor is putting in to give you some, and it's not paid. It's different than a consultant in a
Yeah.
transactional relationship. And so at least the return is to see that you're doing good in the world as a mentor, to say, oh, they actually followed through on that.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And it feels like we had Will Guidara on the show, who wrote Unreasonable Hospitality, and he was talking about the pleasure and the addiction of serving other people. And it just feels so good to do hospitality.
Mm.
In a professional sense, it almost feels the same. Like it's not money, it's deeper, it's more transcendent than that.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can tell when people love to do it. They can't
Yeah.
stop themselves.
The one thing I know is for certain, and maybe you feel the same way, as you've had to sit with your thoughts and what you've learned over the years. You've written books. I compare podcasting to just kind of like thinking out loud, oftentimes, and live journaling. Um, I didn't realize how much I knew until I started teaching in
Yes.
some way. And I get the feeling that to be a mentor, some people feel like they need to have this epiphany, this moment of, I've arrived and now I can distribute my expertise. You know, how do we get over that? Because it feels like a lot of us actually could be great mentors to people, but we're suffering from a little bit of imposter syndrome.
Sure. Sure. And look, all you need to do is have an experience that the other person didn't have yet or is going
Mm-hmm.
through, and know a little bit more. So I'll give you an example. My youngest son, when he was a tween, he was a magician. People hired him, he did magic shows, and his mentor was another magician who was in college. He was a college student. It wasn't David Copperfield. He was a college student who was running a business as a magician. And that's how he learned. And then he, in turn, as a tween, my son was mentoring my nephew, who was a few years younger and trying to learn magic. So you're never too young and never too old. If the Nobel Prize winners in their 70s and 80s still have mentors, I think the rest of us can have it. And if a tween can have it, the rest of us can be mentors as well.
What a great example. Keep the magic going.
That's it.
Here's something about accessibility that I'm curious about, because you said 61% of these relationships are organic, which means that they're happening in these Slack channels, or these,
Yeah.
the breakout rooms of conferences, or in text threads and other things like that. Now, not everybody has access to those things. Um, they could in some sense, but it seems like there's some value in formal mentorship
Yes.
uh, programs, we'll say, where now it's such a hard offer that this is for the purpose of mentoring, as a way of giving somebody permission to even bring the subject up. Um, where is the value today, especially regarding accessibility, in mentorship programs within businesses?
Yeah. So 100% of the Fortune 50 companies have mentoring programs, 98% of the Fortune 500. So we know this works. This is the best retention tool out there. And people who are mentored out earn, outperform. Those who are not, they get promoted more often. The mentees get promoted and the mentors get promoted. And those who are mentors show greater loyalty and don't leave the organization. Now, I
Mm-hmm.
did say that most of the mentoring relationships happen organically, but there is very, very much a space for formal mentoring programs. And that's specifically for those who don't naturally have access to it, or don't naturally know how to ask for it, or have been culturally raised to not show vulnerability and not to ask for help because it's a sign of weakness. So
Yeah.
traditionally, those are people who are junior, those are women, and those are underrepresented groups statistically. So when you have a formal mentoring program, this is what we do. This is part of it. So no matter what group you're in, even if it's one of the groups that does not traditionally go out to seek mentorship, you're now in a mentoring program. You will be matched. Now, for anyone listening who's thinking of running a mentorship program, I want to just forewarn you about one thing that most organizations get wrong, which is the problem I have with formal mentoring programs. There's a few problems, but one is those matches. They're usually completely random. They'll say, Chris, you're originally from New York. Ruth, you're from New York. Therefore, you two should be matched, because, of course, everyone from New York is exactly the same. That makes absolutely no sense at all. But that is how random these matches get made. I think it's a great starting point. But if there's no connection, that relationship will not work. So, for anyone who's designing mentoring programs, I think, yes, do those matches, but also have an exit ramp. An exit ramp, so if it doesn't work, those matches can be changed. As I said, it's not a life sentence. And
Right.
there are ways that it can be scaled. There are definitely ways to create a buffer as well, which is where the mentoring teams, remember I told you I have 7 mentors? Those mentoring teams are so helpful. And anyone can create a mentoring team. And then finally, I think there needs to be some training for the mentors. Not, I've done this before, so therefore I can now be a mentor. No, that's your own experience. Do you know the best practices out there on how to do it? Do you know how to mentor somebody who's different than you? Different generation, different gender, different culture, different religion, different time zone, different whatever. So there is some training that needs to be done, and we often don't do that for mentors. We focus a lot on the mentees, telling them how to be better. There needs to be some focus on the mentor. So there's definitely a place for those formal programs, especially for those groups who don't automatically reach out and seek it out themselves.
That's a great point about training
Yeah.
the mentor. And I'm curious what those elements are that need to be considered before we just foist these mentors upon the lives of our mentees.
Yeah. So this is some of the things that I do, where I go all over the work teaching mentors how to be master mentors, how to have difficult conversations, how to give feedback, how to get them to think bigger and stretch their way they're thinking, how to deal with it when the mentee has imposter syndrome. What do you do when the mentee is not living up to expectations? There's so many things that we can talk about: the leadership development, the communication, the feedback, all of that is taught.
Yeah. So the part that I think we're needing to focus on here, especially for coffee shops and small businesses, is the first step to developing something that is maybe a little bit formal in their environment, because in a elbow to elbow uh, serving the public environment, there's a lot of head down, isolated, survive the shift kind of mentality. And we do, and a lot of people that want to start coffee shops and do, they say, well, this is for the community, I want to give back, I want to, they have an others focused mindset. There's a little love loss when you have to do all the paperwork, and you have to just, you try to become profitable. All of the values that you started with, the altruism, if you will, starts to diminish a little bit more in favor of something more pragmatic. How do we make mentorship in an environment like that a reality? Like, what would be the first most like appropriate step to take?
I think this is where a group of peers would work so well, what we call a community of practice. So imagine if we had coffee shop owners within a time zone, within a state, whatever it is, get together on Zoom or whatever it is. They can meet each other, and then you can learn from each other as well. How are you guys thinking of dealing with the holiday rush? What are you doing about employees quitting all the time? How are you guys motivating your employees? What is something that has been selling well within your coffee shop? What is some of the marketing that you have done? These are all
Yeah,
things that we can learn from each other, right? How did you get
agreed.
to that next phase? How did you start to franchise what you're doing? How did you build the next shop that you were doing? What are some of the ways that you're giving back? Oh, does anyone want to collaborate on a project? We can do things together,
Yeah,
right? And that's what happens in these conversations. You need to get yourself out of your silo, start opening it up to other people who are doing the work that you're doing. Some will be senior to you, some at your level, some junior to you. Now, look, if you've been running your shop for 20 years, don't think that there's nothing you can learn from the 25-year-old. The 25-year-old can show you how to become an influencer on social media and use digital marketing
yeah.
to leverage and build your business. There's always something that can be learned, and we can learn it from anyone, right? So you want to get these different groups together. You will see that your business will thrive as a result.
That's such a great point. And I bring this up because I mean we started kind of the a key holder coaching group here at the show, to bring coffee shop owners together for exactly that purpose. But beyond that, at these trade shows where I go to Coffee Fest, et cetera, and I'm sure at professional conferences, there is a rush to ask questions of the speaker,
Yeah.
but you're sitting next to some pretty powerful minds.
Yeah.
They are untapped potential if you just ask their, you know, get to know your neighbor
That's
and
right.
have conversations in the water cooler, the hallway, right? And
Yes.
that's where the magic happens. One thing I'm thinking about is that when I train somebody to be a barista, or if I train them for their position and they're trained and they're doing well, I almost feel like, what else is there to teach them?
Mm,
But I know that one of the things that we like to think about is like, how can the next generation take up the mantle and do better than us within the context of an environment like a coffee shop where somebody is trained, they're doing well, setting up a program so that we can enhance their abilities to go farther than simply their job.
yeah.
Is it a matter of offering just time in the form of one-on-ones, or uh, a program that's run on a quarterly basis where you meet with people in a on a topic? How can that happen where we give people a leg up toward another step in their profession that's not technically part of their job in our business, but it's actually helpful for their career?
I think there's so many ways to do it. I think having those meetings that we were talking about, but also letting people know about things. Chris, I watched this LinkedIn Learning course. I know you were talking about a challenge you were having with so and so. I think you would really enjoy it. Here's the link. Chris,
Yeah.
you were telling me about a problem that you were having about so and so. I just listened to this podcast interview. I just read this article. I just listened to this webinar. Here's the link. I think you will really enjoy it. And that's one way of doing it. And I think meeting with other people who are doing the same type of work, these other coffee shop owners, I think is going to be so critical, as long as it doesn't turn into a whining fest. Because the
Oh
whining
yeah.
fest, yes, we all know about those. That's not helpful. That's not,
We
and
all
that's
love
where
to
you need,
commiserate.
right? That's why you need a buffer friend. So I travel quite a bit. I do keynotes all over the world. And whenever I'm traveling somewhere, I will reach out to anyone who I know in that area. And I'll say, let's have a dinner together. Everyone pays their own way. But I'm also putting, remember, I said, have people who are like you. Here's where you have people who are different than you. And I
Mm.
bring people from different areas of my network together, and we have these conversations, and that always leads to collaboration. That always leads to new ideas every time. It doesn't matter if I'm doing it in London or Florida or anywhere else in the world. Highly recommend it.
That's a great practice. I like that. My last question here, I think, is one that is kind of based on the idea of that imposter syndrome again, but it's also dealing with people who consider themselves either outgoing or introverted, and giving yourself permission, even though you've decided that I'm just introverted, I can't do that, or this person, they don't feel like they're giving me the feedback that I want to have, that lets me know that my mentorship is actually taking root. It feels like we need to learn how to judge things outside of what we're comfortable judging. So it doesn't have to be that they give me this like, oh wow, like wide
A
eyes
report
and
card.
smiles.
Yeah.
Yeah, so how do we overcome that so that we're not just selling people short? We actually might be making a difference. It's just it's being expressed a different way.
So just ask. Just ask. Is this working? Is this what you had in mind? Are there any changes you think that I should make? Right. And you will, if you specifically start to ask, you will start to get the information that you need. And remember, you want to start thinking of this as feedback, but I want you to have the mind of an Olympian. Now, the Olympics are coming up. I get glued to the television during the Olympics. If you notice, after any race, any match, any competition, the athlete runs to their coach. Why? What worked? What didn't work? How can I do it better?
Oh,
Because they
yeah.
know that a slight change could mean the difference between making it to the podium and staying off the podium. And
Mm.
they ask religiously, because for them, it's an opportunity for enhancement. So all you have to do is ask. Don't wait for
And
the
that comes
attaboy.
back to the vulnerability.
That's right. That's
It's
right.
hard.
Look, we don't need the gold stars. We're way past that, right? We don't need that. We don't need someone to say, Chris, you're doing a great job. Keep it up. It's not what it's about. When they start to give you more ideas and more ideas and more ideas, that means they like what you're doing. They like the direction that you're going in. That's a sure sign. When they stop and there's always excuses, always a reason they can't get together with you, that might be a reason to back off. And you don't have to fire them. You just don't need to connect with them again.
This has all kind of made the mentorship idea a lot more friendly in my mind. It
Mm.
just feels like a relationship that's natural and is the kind of thing that we want to see in our own lives, people who believe in us. And believing in other people also will help us identify when people believe in us. If we do that for them, they do that for us. And it just feels like what an accelerator to your own personal growth and your career growth. So, Ruth, this has been amazing, and I would invite you to let us know how we can stay in touch with all of your work, and especially around the subject of mentorship.
Absolutely. So the book is called Financial Times Guide to Mentoring. Wherever you love getting books, it should be available. You could, if you want, download the first chapter for free and take a mentoring assessment to see how strong your mentoring relationship is. And that's available at mentoring-guide.com. And if you want to start building your own mentoring team, I have a resource as well. Just go to my website, Ruth Gotian, RUTHGOT, like Tom, IAN, like Nancy, ruthgotian.com/mentoring team. And there will be a resource you can download as well. And LinkedIn is probably the best way to find all the updates. You'll see the articles I'm writing in Forbes and Psychology Today and Harvard Business Review and Fast Company. Always great stuff. And I always translate it into actionable tips that people can implement immediately.
I appreciate it so much. Thank you, Ruth, for your wisdom.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, everyone. Well, I hope that was a insightful episode for you. I would encourage you to follow up and buy the book, The Financial Times Guide to Mentoring, and consider all that you've heard and think about your very next step in giving and or pursuing being mentored by somebody else, giving mentorship and or being a mentee. I think you can do both. A lot of you listening are leaders. You are leaders who have the ability to give to somebody else in some way a piece of information, some insights, and to follow that altruistic and relational urge to pay it forward, to rise up the next generation, and to see that person's success as a great return on your investments and or return on your mission, however you want to phrase it. But I love what we talked about here, especially the idea that it doesn't have to be a big scary thing. And Ruth mentions it's not a life sentence. Sometimes mentorship relationships can just last for a few months or a year, sometimes even longer, but there doesn't have to be a ton of pressure in there. Just a building of trust and goodwill and speaking into and giving into each other's lives. I mean, really, that's what mentorship is about. And today's conversation, I think, has been powerful to help us wrap our heads around this and actually start putting it into practice in our daily lives. So a huge thank you to our special guest today, Ruth Gotian. If you want more information about her work and especially on this particular subject of mentorship, you can go to mentoring-guide.com. Also, check out ruthgotian.com, and you can find a ton more content in terms of articles that she has written, as all of the books that she's published, and dive deep into the subjects that she has become expert in through experience and study. And again, she's breaking this down in a way that we can all understand. It doesn't have to be behind an academic wall. So I'm grateful for that. ruthgotian.com. If you have any questions or comments, feedback from me about today's episode, always feel free to email chris@keystotheshop.com. If you're looking for coaching or consulting for your coffee shop business, then you can reach out to that same email address. Work with Keys to the Shop Consulting, chris@keystotheshop.com. And with that, that is the end of our show. I would encourage you always follow those recommended links to next episodes. Those are always helpful to give you a little bit more insight into the topic we've covered today. And definitely keep sharing these episodes. Subscribe to the show and also subscribe on YouTube. I appreciate all of you so much. Thank you for all of your years of supporting Keys to the Shop to help make the coffee industry, in particular, the industry of coffee shops, better and better. Thank you so much. And as always, I hope that today's episode has truly given you keys to the shop.